It was definitely a specific box, and while I use a particular configuration that folks can take and mirror, if you can find similar hardware configuration, you can actually do the exact same thing. And like you said, I was as part of VMUG Connect, I was trying to think about it, how best to allow folks to get hands-on experience. A lot of our customers started their days with vSphere, started to play with vSAN, NSX, but to be able to play with the full stack and really get the private cloud experience, it's not always the most easiest thing, right? And so I was trying to think about how best to make it, accessible to the broadest set of users. And part of that ultimately just, determines is how much resources you have. Not all of us have, data center scale hardware. And so I was trying to think about, how much could I push our software stack, some of the tweaks I've learned from engineering to be able to go through the full stack. And so the blog post was using a relatively new vendor. It's called Gemtech. It's a small little AMD system, and what's really nice about these kits is that the CPU cores themselves are starting to get quite high, and have started to do better in terms of comparing to like Intel as an example. So the system I was using was called a K11. From a price perspective, it's fairly inexpensive. So this is a 8-core CPU, 16-thread system, and it's a roughly about 479 US for that kit, right? And basically, you bring your own memory, you bring your own storage. There's a similar kit that recently got updated called an K8 Plus. That's about $100 cheaper. So just for the bare bone system, you're looking at sub $500, which is fantastic. If you think about a decade ago, these systems, these Nook-like systems, that fit in the palm of your hand, they're like $1,000. So the prices have come down quite significantly. The other interesting thing about the system is that it has a couple of NVMe slots. So you can imagine the types of configuration you might want to do, ESXi, vSAN, of course, vSAN ESA, and then I did some creative things to try to get things like NVMe tiering. So it was really just taking a look at, can I reduce the form factor, number of hosts, and then ultimately, what can I basically fit into that system? And more interestingly, some of these newer systems support DDR5, so they support dual rank DDR5 memory modules. And just a couple months back, 64 gig single DIMMs were made available. So what that means is I can basically buy a $500 system and I can load it all the way up to 128 gigs of DRAM, right? And so if you think about this, 5, 6 years ago, this is unheard of, right? The most you can get is maybe 32, 64 gigs. And, now you can fit quite a bit of resources in here. So now you can imagine like, wow, this is pretty darn powerful, right? Perfect for something like a VCF lab setup.